You're on, baby. So just swivel. Or, no, that's not too swivel. Oh, okay.
Portable products, by the way, so you don't have one. These are awesome because you can screw them into the bottom of almost any portable recorder or your camera, and you can take pictures anywhere. Yeah. My favorite trick is to take my little Casio digital thing and hang it off my rearview mirror if you want to record something. So it's a tricky thing. You ready?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, I'm Whitney Hoffman. I'm probably known for doing the LD podcast. I'm probably going to step in front of my screen about 800 times, but it doesn't matter because the words are more important than the pictures. This is just illustrations. So basically, one of the best books that I've read this past year has been Made to Stick. And it's by Chip and Dan Heath, they're brothers. One of them teaches at Stanford University and has done a whole series of things all about urban legends. And what is about urban legends like, you know, kidney thieves coming and taking your kidney when they get you drunk in a bar and stealing it and selling it on the black market, or whatever, you know, alligators in the New York City sewers. What makes those stories particularly memorable and what makes them stick? And his brother was off working for a company called Thinkwell, which was all about how to make textbooks really more innovative and how to really reach kids. So they wrote this really great book called Made to Stick, and basically it's about, you know, do your ideas blend in, like my cell phone cover and a picture at the Modern Museum of Art in New York? Or do they stand out as really kind of different and unique? You know, you may think that's a great piece of art or an ugly piece of art, but you certainly don't walk by it without noticing it. So, same thing's really true about everything in new media. It's really about engagement and trying to get people to pay attention to your ideas. If there's a long tail of the web there, you can put out any piece of information you want, but it's got to be compelling material to somebody. And so you've got to make somebody want to tune in week after week and listen to what you have to say. You know, I think when I first started, it'll be 2 years in June since I produced my first podcast. It's totally amazing when I looked at my Google Analytics, and there are people in over 26 countries listening to my podcast, which from my little house and my little studio, which is, you know, talking and doing interviews over the internet, seems to me to be kind of a crazy thing that there are people in China and everywhere else listening. I got a phone call from somebody recently. They wanted to use part of my podcast as their materials for a conference they're putting on in Hong Kong, all about learning and learning disabilities. Could have blown me away with a feather, but I mean, that's the power of what you can do once you decide you want to have your voice heard. This slide is just really to show you, you know, Harry Potter is probably one of the stickiest ideas ever, and this is an idea that was a mom, single mom, out of work, started writing in coffee shops, and that was Harry Potter. Star Wars, we just went to a show where they did the Science Meets Imagination show in the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia, where over 400 people showed up in costume, legions of stormtroopers up and down the front walk. My kids, who are 9 and 12, who've seen some of the movies but not all of them, totally intrigued. It's as sticky for them as it was the day that I first saw, you know, Princess Leia put the little disc into R2-D2, and now I sit there and look at my kids and I'm like, all right, that looks like it's a really big CD player, but really in 1976 that was cool, you know. So they're really things. You know, making your ideas memorable is all trying to get the information to present it in a way that people are going to remember it. This deals with learning, obviously, because there's certain ways your working memory and everything else work, and that's true across the board whether you're talking about kids or grown-ups. And giving that information in a way that people are going to remember it is important, particularly if you're doing anything that's kind of informational. New media tools can help make your ideas stickier, and you should think, and we'll get to this a little later on, about how you want to present your ideas. I mean, my biggest thing is everybody likes Speedsnick, they think it's cool. What you see basically is a bunch of people with headphones talking on the computer. And for me, I don't have that much time to watch people talking to a camera. You know, that's not something that I find real compelling for video content. So, you know, the one plea I'll make you to make if you're thinking about content and making your ideas stick, think about the difference between show and tell. There are times you want to show people stuff, like it's much more effective to show you what this little digital recorder does, and you can do different capsules on it and whatever, and it's a really powerful little tool. Telling you about it helps, but showing it and showing you that you can have a podcast studio in your hand may be more effective. So you've got to figure out what the difference is between show and tell. So the elements of sticky ideas are basically, you know, they've got this little success thing because everybody needs to have a moniker or 10 points in order to sell their book, right? So it's make something simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional, and stories. And those are really the elements of sticky ideas. You can have some of them, rarely do you have all of them, but these are the elements that help make your ideas memorable. Now, this just looks like a random bunch of letters. If I asked you to memorize these or look at them, you try and look at them and see if you can remember any of these groups. People remember things in chunks. This is the reason why phone numbers are broken up usually with area code, the other access code, and then the other numbers. You remember not my home phone number, 302-562-6507. I even say it, 6507. Chunk it up in different bits. I don't have to remember each digit individually. I remember it in chunks. So, and then there's interference in attention, which means if now I give you a whole bunch of other information, like talking now, you're not going to remember what those letters are. And that's the reason why headlines in newspapers and headlines in articles and whatever are good. It's short, core, simple messages that get you and promote you to read the next thing. So let's say you're doing a Twitter post like we were just talking about in this program section. One of the things to do, make those messages if you want to refer people on, you're basically writing headlines to get them to go look at other content. We'll look at those letters again, just for the sake of argument. Now, if we regroup those letters, that's a whole different ball of wax. Same letters, same order, just change the spacing. And it's the same way with any message that you get. But even things like JFK, that not only gets you to those three letters, it gets you to a whole host of information about his being assassinated, being a U.S. president, being one of the younger ones, being Catholic, everything else. Same with the rest of those letters. All of those groups actually in your memory get you into a separate folder that has a ton of different information. And so you can think about presenting information to people the same way. And just changing the way it's presented, you change the meaning. Here's a good example of something that's unexpected. I mean, you see that sign and, your neurons go, oh, well, that's unusual. And you pay attention to it. Same thing should happen when you're doing anything in new media. When are you going to make things surprising? Jokes are constantly based on that element of surprise and that element of, exaggerating something. Stupid joke from the other day at dinner, my kids are fighting. One of them happens to be doing a unit on evolution. The little one thinks this is cool, starts yelling, primate fight at the table when everybody's arguing. Dorky, but you remember it clearly. This is a classic example of everything that's really memorable and shocks you. Everybody's had this trick where they've got the stupid jar of peanuts. You guys have to have had this up here in Canada too, where somebody says, hey, you want one? And the thing springs out in your head. You remember that every time somebody hands you one of those dumb little cans that doesn't sound quite right now. You know that, and you remember that even if you've only had that experience once. And the same thing is true. Whenever you get a big surprise, even if it's somebody jumping out around the corner, it leads to trust issues, it leads to all sorts of things, but you're going to remember that. Here's something that I found in New York City when I was on a trip there. Can't really see it quite as well, but basically you've got a swimsuit model for Sports Illustrated, and then you've got a straw down to another Dasani ad here. The thing that I found most interesting, they put the straw in upside down. Now, probably not a lot of other people noticed that. Me with ADHD, that's the first thing I noticed. So, we all have attention issues. That was mine, but I thought that was kind of a clever way of using space in New York. Then there's things about making your ideas really concrete. There's this really interesting thing, and I think it's cool, so I'm going to bore you with a little thing about mirror neurons. When in your brain, there's a whole section of your brain that has to do with mimicking the actions that you see. So the reason why parents get all stressed out over video games is they think when their kids see somebody shooting a gun, that's what's going on in their brain. To a certain extent, that's true. The real problem with video games is video games are addictive because they start out with one level a little easier and then a little more challenging and a little more challenging and a little more challenging. It bigs up to a bigger puzzle. That sort of taking people along for the ride is the really addictive thing about video games. But when you want somebody to participate, when you're doing things that are concrete, that's when you really get to the idea of getting your messages across. Julian Smith is helping a great show called Start Cooking. Having a cooking show that's just audio, it might be cool for 1 or 2 episodes to hear people crack eggs. After a while, that's not going to work as well as showing people the outcome. And that's going to be a really concrete example of everything to see. people are looking at that, they can see doing it. It makes things possible that they might not think are possible otherwise. And so choosing the medium to get your ideas progressed is really the best. And again, the show and tell thing, which I've already sort of babbled about. Credible sources. This is really interesting. Why are you a credible source on anything that you do? Some people really want you to have 85 different degrees. I started podcasting basically because I'd written a book. I do have a degree in developmental biology. I am a lawyer. But I was doing a book all about learning disabilities because I've got 2 kids with ADHD who've been through specialized schooling. Every parent I know had been through the same sort of horror story in terms of finding the help that they needed for their kids. And I actually got the things to an agent in New York through an author that I had spoken to, and they said, this is really great, but you don't have a master's in education, so I'm not sure you're a credible source. And so I said, well, let me see if I can build my own audience, because I'd been listening to MommyCast and knew that other mothers were podcasting, and I said, well, I think I can do this. Now, 2 years later, I can call pretty much anybody up on the phone, and they're taking my phone calls and talking to me, and it's great, and it provides a resource for them. If you've got a book coming out about anything sort of in the learning field, it will get you straight to the audience that you want to have read that book. But it also creates a conversation for everybody on both sides. So it's a more credible source. But why else is it credible? Because I do a ton of research, and I really try to drive the point home. And I'm talking from my own experiences, which are dealing with my crazy kids, not doing their homework. It was amazing to me when I went back recently and I looked at which of the episodes of my podcast were the most popular. And the one that stuck out, which totally shocked me, was one where I was talking about how hard it is sometimes to talk to teachers and really get a relationship that helps work for your kid in school. And at one point in the conversation, I'm sort of, tearing up and kind of crying, and you can hear it in my voice. Why do people want to hear me cry on the internet? I had absolutely no idea, but really what it is that's a memorable, real moment that makes an impact on other people, and other people who've been there and have heard that. That means something to them. It's not just, hey, how are you? I've got a used car and a book for you to read. Here you go. Because nobody wants to hear that. I mean, we've been hearing that for years. So, and after a while, I think you build up your own credibility. You build up your credibility with your audience by giving them information that they need and that they can use. And here's a classic example. I tutor kids twice a week for credibility. BBC News article says that 13.5 million adults in the UK have become stressed while carrying out basic sums. 10 million lack confidence in literacy skills. Math skills are used on average 14 times a day, literacy skills 23 times a day, and about 8 million people in the UK are willing to ask somebody else to do a task rather than tackle it themselves just to avoid being embarrassed. Now, if you take a bunch of kids who are in 6th grade and are sitting there and going, really, why do I have to memorize multiplication tables? This is stupid. I've got a calculator. What's the problem? You tell them that people are getting heart attacks and heart disease, and this is the reason why, and it's coming out of the BBC. You get a different impact, and all of a sudden they're paying a little more attention in class because they're realizing, wow, I really do need this stuff for. So, it's credible because it's a trusted source. Using specific numbers and statistics lend credibility clearly. It's something that every kid in my class can clearly relate to, and it drives the point home to them that, learn it now, suffer later. But that's just a quick example of how you can use credibility to really get a point across effectively. Now, that's my youngest, and that's my husband, and the slightly older one there. But you want an emotional thing, I remember these pictures. We all remember family pictures because they have an emotional meaning to you. Captain Expressive here is right here. He came in from outside because his brother hit him in the face with a water gun, but he was just too darn cute, so of course I pulled out the camera. But, making an emotional connection, I just talked about this a second ago, you really make people care, and they're willing to do stuff for you when there's a connection to be made. When you're forming an audience of listeners, you've got an emotional connection there. The only time I've really ever asked my audience for anything was recently. I don't know if you guys were in Chris Brogan's session. I started a program to raise some money for a mother in China who's starting her own autism school, and really, so she can buy a farm basically, so these kids after they graduate from school have a place to go. And rather than bore you again with that, for those of you that have already heard it, we've raised some money that'll go directly to her. And these kids will not have a future that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And we've been able to raise, I guess it's about over $1,400 so far. It'd be nice to get to the whole $10,000 that she needs, but whatever we can get her buys so much more over there than it does here. It'll get her halfway towards her goal, and I think it's a worthwhile thing to try. This is just another message that's sort of aside and slightly off the point, but in social media, in new media, it's as easy to swing for the fences as it is to swing for first base. Raising $10,000 sounds like a lot of money, but if you've got enough friends and everything else, you can at least start raising some money and make a dent in the problem. And, it's just as easy to do it halfway as it is to do it completely. If I was just still sitting there saying, I wish somebody had a podcast about learning, then, there might not be one. But you can really just say, look, I can do this. It's not that hard. And ask somebody. There are tons of people in this room who are sources who are just really wonderful. I came back from PodCamp Boston 1, and Julian Smith had been there and said, he did a recording with Mark Levis and Bob Goyetch in the car, saying, if you're a podcaster, you should have a blog. And the reason why is Google picks up the information on blogs and text more than it does off of audio, because audio isn't really searchable in a very easy way. So having a blog is really important. Chris helped me set one up, and he actually got me hooked up with a couple friends of his, and now I also blog over at GNM Parents. And there was a question in the prior session also about, how do I get moms to realize that social media is important? Well, for basically one blog post a week, we have a blog that is, I think, the writing on there most of the time is as good as it is in the New Yorker. It happens to be about parenting issues and everything, and some stuff is funny. I did one thing this summer about, did you guys know loofahs come from a squash, really? I mean, we got a loofah at my local farmer's market and did it and, put that up because it was kind of cool. That was a fun project to do with the kids. But other times, I'm talking about how annoyed I am that the school system is not really responsive to the needs of kids. But you can just make those voices heard and other people jump in and say that they have problems. I got a phone call from a mom recently who needed help before she went to a meeting with the teachers for her kids. And she's like, I'm sure you get hundreds and thousands of these emails a day. And I'm just like, this is not broadcast television, But you can really make a connection, and it creates a conversation that's really powerful. And this makes it, I guess it's a quid pro quo. I mean, I may be giving stuff out. We may occasionally be giving books out and everything else to the audience. I try not to ask them for very much because I'm just glad that they're listening. Your time is good for me. Did ask them for the Manchen thing. A bunch of people contributed. I'm thrilled. But again, my metrics is not how many people are going to give me money on a weekly basis. It's about the connections we're making and how we're making education different for kids. Now, this is cute. This is from the quote trail last year. But telling stories is probably the most important part of what we do on the internet and in new media. The stories stick because the structure of storytelling makes things easy to remember. I mean, who doesn't know the story of the three bears? This is something that not only through repetition, but whatever, it's got, stories have beginnings, middles, ends. We remember them all as one unit and one structure. It chunks out information, it connects it all together. There's often a point or a meaning or the moral of the story. And, this is all what law school and MBA school and even, going to med school is all about. It's case-based learning, which is just little stories. Law school for me, because at one point I was headed to medical school, well, law school for me was just so easy because it was just stories, and all you have to do is follow the money to the story because people only sue each other over money, and boom, law school, piece of cake, 3 years, no problem. But case-based learning is just storytelling. And there's a great school in Philadelphia called Science Leadership Academy. It's now in its second year, so there's freshmen and sophomores there. These kids they've got an engineering class for their science class. They made their own biodiesel and tested it. They developed a flow process. They actually have a patent pending, and they're actually working with a little town in Ecuador now to make that as part of their sustainability program. How many kids did that in 10th grade? I want to go back and go to this school again. But the part of this school is not just that the tech is cool, and not just that the engineering is cool, and not that just everybody is there and seems engaged, but the community aspect of the school is much more important than the tech. Every kid has a computer, but the teachers are all about the relationship with the kids first, then the curriculum, then the tech. They're finding the kids are showing up to school early every day, and they're leaving late. They've got to shoo them out of the building at 6:30 at night. The fact that they're like, have you ever seen kids not want to leave school at the end of the day? You know, this is like a crazy thing because this is an inner city Philadelphia public school. But it's a great story, and it's a great new media story because it's really all about the community connection. It's about the storytelling itself, and it's about the fact that these tools, the computers and everything else we use, are just like pencils. They're only as good as the mind on the other side of it and what you're going to connect with. One of the English teachers says that, you know, when he really needs his kids' attention, he said, I can't compete with anything going on the screen. All I do is I just say, screens down, and we'll talk to everybody. And then when they're ready to do the next assignment, screens up, and then can communicate by Facebook or do whatever they want. And now, of course, I've screwed up my presentation. Here we go. Oh, cool. Life has returns as I'm trying to do a demo, right? So, stories matter. Every story you hear from, you know, how the copier broke or how, you know, God, I dropped my iPhone in the toilet or whatever it is. I mean, it's all a story. You don't have to go through that experience because you get to experience that secondhand, and that's that mirror neuron thing again. Stories pass knowledge and solve problems. Now, I'll embarrass myself by one of my very early cuisine things when I was not yet married, and he married me anyway. Decided to make beer and cheese soup because it sounded like a good thing we had it at a restaurant once. One thing never to do is don't cut up the kielbasa and put it in while it's cooking. You get a salty mess, and you can't undo salty in cooking, it turns out. So apparently I wasn't paying enough attention in chemistry class. So this thing was dreadful, but it meant that my husband and I now have a rule that there's a 10-year statute of limitations on things that you screwed up on. So he can't torture me about the beer cheese soup anymore. And it means, you know, some of those other early things I can't torture him about either. But anyway, you know, we all tell stories, and it's, again, don't put sausage in the soup. It's a bad idea. Serve it afterwards on the side.
You change that 10 years to like 2 years?
Hey, every marriage is its own contract, and you get to renegotiate the terms with your spouse on a regular basis. So, you know,
So 10 could be 15 then?
It's your own personal relationship, baby. It's freedom of contract, you know. You're on your own on that one. So, but you know, the story's personalized learning. It's the thing that makes a difference. When I'm doing a blog post, there's basically usually a beginning, middle, and end. Sometimes it rambles a little bit. The things that read better are the ones that follow basically a story format and have something and don't ramble too much. And it's a way, again, to make things memorable and to make things personal for somebody. So, have you guys ever seen this guy? This is a belted Galway cow. Right near where I live this is actually from Delaware, right over the border from where I live. But these are really unusual cows. Seth Godin tells this great story about, you know, what's the most unusual thing you could ever see, the purple cow. And that we should all really try and do something that's special and unusual because there's a lot of ordinary around there. There's not a lot that's really special. And, you know, something as unusual as a weird cow is something that captures your attention. And it goes back to some of those other elements we were talking about in terms of making things memorable, using visuals when visuals are helpful. You know, I can tell you about that cow all day, but it doesn't have the visual impact of actually seeing this weird-looking striped cow that looks like somehow, you know, you messed around with them in Photoshop. But
you drink milk from that cow with an Oreo cookie.
There you go. Absolutely.
Well, yeah.
Well, and now, you know...
Not from that cow.
Okay. There were too many people stopping and taking pictures of this that actually when they have the farmer's market in this little town right afterwards, now somebody got it so there's stuffed cows at that. So now you can buy a stuffed cow. Basically because too many people were stopping by his farm and taking pictures of the cow. So, you know, new media tells stories. Their multimedia stories are, you know, you can tell them for any purpose. A real artist of this is This American Life with Ira Glass. And one of the things he recently said on his podcast is that if you want to say how you're evangelizing the show to your friends and trying to get them to listen, to call in. It was busy this morning while I was on my way to PodCamp. I was going to tell him that I was going to talk to you guys about This American Life. There's also a really great series of YouTube videos, 3 short ones, where Ira tells elements of good storytelling and how through... Are you guys familiar with This American Life at all?
No.
Okay. It's about an hour's worth of audio. They usually have different segments. They tell different stories. They're usually weird, kind of quirky things. But it's very great storytelling. It gives you a sense for rhythm and cadence. It's not a bad model to follow if you're trying to figure out what you want to do for podcasting. The audio is good. The music is used as a support. And Ira's little videos on YouTube, again, that tell you about storytelling are probably some of the best ones. One of the examples he uses is, George woke up the other day and he listened around and it was really, really quiet, too quiet. And he got out of bed and he went and he brushed his teeth and he went downstairs and it was really, really too quiet. And he just couldn't, what was going on? It was just weirdly quiet. Now, see, this is the beginning of the world's most boring story of somebody getting up out of bed in the morning and making coffee and brushing his teeth, right? Dull as dishwater. But you tell it in a certain way, and there's a certain amount of suspense because you're expecting something to happen. Is the anvil going to fall out of the sky on the guy, or, is his wife going to be murdered downstairs, or God only knows what. But the way you lead people into a story makes a big difference with how well you're going to listen to it. The Mac versus PCS. Those are very silly, but they're memorable because they're short little stories, and they ring true to almost anybody who's ever argued with a PC. So they're very memorable. And it just, again, storytelling adds stick. There's video blogs, there's movies, there's podcasts. There's 100 different ways to tell your story. It's just what you want. Here's something else on the incongruous thing that I thought I'd throw in here. This is a parking garage in Philadelphia. How many people think of parking garages as being particularly virtuous? Not me. But I put this up, and Chris Penn actually commented on one of these, like, honey, where did we park the Hummer? Was it between compromise or humility? But again, it's great things to remember. It's great to remember how far the American government has actually swayed for most of those. But again, it's something that's incongruous enough that it catches your mind and catches your memory, and you remember it afterwards. So, what do we have here? String the beads together. The stories are sticky. You can use them for any purpose. From Chris usually has a duct tape wallet to whatever. You can use those ideas and make them for whatever they want. Yeah, see? He does. There's even duct tape for
I wish it would make money sticky.
That would really work. But yeah, so that's basically it. So do you guys have any questions, or anything else?
What were the videos again? The names on YouTube?
The videos?
Yeah.
If you look for This American Life or Ira Glass on YouTube.
Ira?
Ira, I-R-A, space, G-L-A-S-S.
Oh, just to translate for Canadians too, the word American in this case has nothing to do with patriotic anything. It's just the name of the story.
Yeah, David Sedaris, I don't know if you guys have heard that. He's a frequent contributor. Sarah Bowell, who did the voice of Violet on The Incredibles and stuff like that, is on there. There's some really great people. It sounds like CBC stuff, so I think it will translate well.
School of the Chicago.
Chicago Public Radio. Yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of schooling, one of the interesting things is I'm actually working with a public television station. They happen to do the LD Online website, and they're going to export parts of the podcast to use on their website. One of the things that really came down as a production issue is how long can your intros be? So, I've made it a short habit to now every time I'm listening to the radio, I'm timing how long people's intros are so I have a sense of how long they should be. The answer is 35 to 45 seconds on the whole. But, basically, one of the best things to do to figure out what your style is going to be, figure out what's comfortable most with yourself. Figure out how to present your ideas in a way that are going to be sticky. We've got all those elements about that. The Made to Stick book is a quick and easy read, and I recommend it highly. But basically, it's about telling people what you care about in a way they're going to remember it in distinct packages. And it will stay with them, and it'll help. Yes?
You mentioned a really interesting term earlier, show and tell. Podcasting, unfortunately, is not visual. What do you have to say about the retention rates as opposed to podcasting with audio as opposed to having a visual story?
I think it depends what kind of story you're telling and what kind of audience you're looking for. Because again, I can say there's only so long that I'm going to sit there and watch YouTube videos, like there's only so long I'm going to sit there and watch TV. There's a lot of stuff that I do on my commute, or I listen to stuff while I'm doing other things in the house. So for me, I consume a lot more audio than I do video, which is one of the reasons why, as cool as Seismic is, that I don't find that with learning and learning disabilities, if I'm talking about meeting with your kids at school, showing a particular horrific video of that is necessarily illustrative of what I'm talking about. But there are other stories that lend themselves to video, yes?
I can tell you from experience. Typically, if you're going to do a podcast, if you want to make it something that people want, a good time limit is 30 to 40 minutes.
Yeah.
That way, it's an easy listen for people, and it's not a big commitment. I've seen so many people whine and complain that the podcast goes for an hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours. I personally try to keep mine, on average, 30 to 40. Unless it's a special, like Christmas special, Halloween special, this podcast conference maybe will be a little longer than 30 to 40 minutes. But I find an average audience will only engage so much time. And then they'll go, I need other things to do.
But that also depends on the type of audience, too.
Yeah.
Now,
Sure.
my audience doesn't want anything longer than 20 minutes.
Yeah, but you have
What's your
to
podcast?
Yeah.
I do one on gay and lesbian issues, and I tell a lot of stories. But I think one of the things to hit home about telling stories is that when you're either blogging about it or doing a podcast about it, is to talk in just your normal speaking voice.
Oh, absolutely.
How you would talk, not necessarily how you'd write it in a book.
And I think that's definitely true. I think I get much more tired with
People who are using their studio voice when they're doing that.
Yeah.
Because it gets really annoying, and they're talking like they're on the radio all the time.
and it just doesn't sound like anything I'm really going to personally connect with. And I don't care if you're talking about your computer, you're talking about something else. If you're not really using your voice, it doesn't make that connection with me that I really want to hear. So I tend to tune out of those podcasts, even if there's some information there. A good guy who does stuff on technical subjects is Rob Walsh, who does Podcast 411 and Today on iPhone and a bunch of other things. He's just talking about his gear. Sometimes it's a little rambling, but it gets the point across. Mark and Bob talk about tech stuff all the time on Canadian Podcast Buffet, and they do a great job of sort of breaking it down into chunks, and I can use that information and then carry it with me and go do other things. But again, some things lend themselves to video format really well. If you're doing something about walks on the beach, if Keith behind you is going to do something about wood turning and how to really make that happen, that's a visual kind of thing. I think a lot of people get really excited about video and they're like, I'm going to do video because video is going to be huge. It's going to be huge. But, again, there's a lot of crap on TV too. You just have to sort of decide if you want to really show people stuff or not. It requires a different amount of attention to use both your eyes and ears at the same time. It requires people to be in front of the TV, computer, iPod, Zoom, whatever, for an extended period of time. You're going to miss parts of the audience by doing it otherwise. There's a great lady who's starting a podcast. She's doing a call-in show. Again, on learning disabilities. It's out of Seattle. A couple different issues there. She's doing it video, so again, the only thing you see on this now live platform she's using is her and her headphones talking to a microphone going, while everybody else is talking. 45 minutes drives me batty. That's an audio format show. It's not a visual show. Even if you want to occasionally do a video thing, awesome. But most of the time, watching somebody go, and whatever else on video, it's just not all that attractive. And the other problem is, if you're choosing stuff, don't choose a name that you yourself can't spell because you're not going to get any search engine optimization. Her thing is an Intuit word, which is Sisutl is SISIUTL. Even in internet speak, I can't pronounce it and I can't spell it. So, you're not going to have people find that if somebody else is talking about it on their podcast very well either, because nobody's going to be able to remember it and spell it because it's not a natural speaking word. Yeah, Russ.
No, that's good. I'm agreeing with you there.
Yeah, so keep it simple. Keep it straightforward. And that'll make it more memorable. Are you thinking about doing something in particular video, or?
Actually, I was thinking more just like visuals. There's not really a tool out there that allows you to audio things without visuals.
You can, in a way. If you have a Mac and you have GarageBand, you can record an audio podcast and link up
Yeah, but you're like an MP4.
as the audio is going through. And you can actually place pictures in each part of your audio. So you can listen and look at, say, an iPod or any other, I'm not going to...
The newspapers do that now.
Yeah.
They do a narrated slideshow.
Yeah, so you can, that is possible.
Right, and it's not bad for some things, but then again, also consider doing some things in MP3 and MP4 format at the same time, because some people, they don't have a video iPod, you're cutting out that share of the audience, or if they've got Sansa or something else, because that doesn't handle the video part, it doesn't handle the MP4. The other thing is the best presenters I've ever seen use their slides basically as being illustrations for their actual talk. Number one, nobody can coach the talk because it's your pictures and everything else, and it's the words that are important, and people are paying attention to you rather than trying to read the slides. The very worst presentations I've ever been to are the ones where people are just reading their slides. I went to this EduCon 2.0, which was an education conference recently, and there was a guy there who, I'm trying to ask him questions, and we're trying to engage with the audience, and his whole time is like, I'm behind, I've got more slides. He's got a slide deck of about 120 slides he's trying to get through in this presentation. And after a while, it's like, I don't care what's on your slide deck, I care what you have to say to me. He was talking about visual mapping and how you can do these Venn diagrams and everything else to help kids learn things. So I said, well, have you ever thought about doing that in terms of how that applies to website design? Because websites essentially are multi-page Venn diagrams for all. It's like, oh, well, I don't have any expertise in that. I got more slides. And it's like, okay, you're trying to teach kids and teach teachers to get kids to think out of the box, but, if it's not straight in your box, you don't know anything about it or aren't willing to consider, then it might be an interesting idea. So, the mashups are the most interesting stuff. It's that incongruous surprise ideas, like, educators and podcasters in the same room. That's always fun. This is largely, I call it geek stuff when we come to podcast. People come from different parts of things, but, we all are in love with this and are able to form a community. And I think probably that's time, but hi, Internet. How are you? But
How large is your community?
Well, again, that gets into the metrics question. What do you measure? If you want to know the total number of downloads, total so far since I did it, that's around 60,000. On a weekly basis, it sort of depends on the show and whatever. About 2,000, 2,500 downloads a week. But, and I have no idea if that's good or bad because I have no idea what anybody else is downloading.
That's good. That's good.